Welcome to Torah on the Go. Whether you are walking your dog or stuck in traffic or sitting at home at your computer, ready to learn, we are ready to learn with you. And we so appreciate you taking the time from your day to learn with Valley Beth Shalom. I am sitting here next to Rabbi Feinstein. Welcome.
Welcome.
We're here talking about Genesis. Weeks and weeks and weeks, studying the book of Genesis, Sefer Bereshit. We read it for weeks every single year as the first book in the Torah. And this week, I'd like to focus on perhaps one of the most misunderstood characters, or perhaps one of the most well-understood characters. We'll decide, the two of us will decide once and for all. The character's name is Lavon, and that word means white. Mm-hmm. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And he is Rebekah's brother. So the first time we meet him, he is the older brother of child Rebekah, who is chosen by Eliezer, Abraham's servant, to be, or perhaps God chooses her, depending on how we read the text, to be Isaac's wife. And Laban immediately welcomes him into their father's tent and brings him back. And then the next time we meet Laban is Jacob runs away from home because his brother Esau swears that he will kill him once his father dies. And Jacob ends up back in Laban's control. There he meets Laban's two daughters, goes about marrying them both unintentionally. And Laban not only gives him two daughters, but also gives him two maidservants that end up producing children for Jacob. Together, those four women produce the 12 tribes of Israel and Dinah. And Laban, through the story, is very complicated. So as we talked about in a previous episode, Jacob carries kind of this motif, this trait of being a kind of trickster, or schemer. Laban matches him in that kind of trickster scheming. The two of them go mano y mano. He tricks Jacob into marrying his older daughter before Leah, before marrying his younger daughter Rachel. He tricks Jacob into working for him many more years. And in the end, they have a kind of match in terms of how much of the flock belongs to Jacob. Mm-hmm. Then this is a very compelling scene at the very end of Laban's narrative, where Jacob breaks away while Laban is on a business trip, takes Laban's daughters and all of his children, Laban's grandchildren, and they run off. Laban catches them. Mm-hmm. And at the very, very end, he says to Jacob, Ma'asita vatignov et livavi. What have you done? You've in fact stolen my heart. Laban loved his daughters and his grandchildren the entire time. And in that moment, you realize
or his wealth.
Or his wealth, right? Or his wealth.
Right.
In that moment, you realize that perhaps he was telling the truth. Perhaps he said, Lo asachen bimkamenu, you don't behave like that in my place. You do have to marry my older daughter before my younger daughter because I have to make sure that someone who's capable at making a living takes care of both of them. I can't have one daughter that goes off with Jacob and one that's left at home. I have to make sure that they're both taken care of. When they run away, I really do want to bless them both. He does bless them, and he blesses all of his grandchildren too. So I bring you to this question, this burning question about Laban. Is he a good father and a bad father-in-law? Is he a bad father and a bad father-in-law? Is he a good father and a good father-in-law to his daughters and to Jacob?
Well, let's take a look at the story from a higher perspective for just a minute, okay? In Western literature, the most common metaphor is the road, the journey. Great mythologist Joseph Campbell wrote a very famous book about the hero on the road. The Iliad, the Odyssey is the road. Chaucer is the road. Bunyan is the road. We know it best in our civilization because it's Dorothy on the yellow brick road. The road is the outward manifestation of the inward journey. It's a metaphor for the journey of the self, its own development. On the road, you meet adversity and you meet helpers. Dorothy meets the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and the Cowardly Lion who help her, and she has to go up against the Wicked Witch of the West.
So scary.
Yeah, and the flying monkeys and the whole story, right?
Terrifying.
And in the course of that, what happens is Dorothy discovers Dorothy. She discovers her own inner resources. She becomes the person she's meant to be. And then in the journey of the hero, she has to go home again. I always wondered about that scene because it's in black and white again. And you wonder, like, having experienced the Technicolor of Oz, why would you want to go back to Kansas? But she goes home again, but she goes home a different person. The Jacob stories in the Torah are the same journey. He leaves home. The journey is fraught with adversity. The principal adversary is Lavan, who is his uncle. And it is through Lavan that Jacob discovers what's most important to Jacob. He discovers his own powers of coping with the world. He discovers what's important to him in the course of that journey. And then he has to come home a different person. So the Bible gives us Lavan as the adversary. And it gives us Lavan as the sort of projection of what's worst in Jacob. Jacob is the trickster. Well, Lavan is the master of trickster. Even the name Lavan means white. In French, white is blanc. He's blank. You can't read him. He's poker-faced, shrewd. He is the one who tricks the trickster. So he's the bad guy. He's a constructed bad guy because it's through him, it's the confrontation with Lavan that Jacob discovers who Jacob wants to be.
In every Disney fairy tale, someone's going to say, oh, what about this one? Okay, most of them, fathers are gone from the picture.
That's true.
It's always a stepmother, right? The dynamic between
mothers are gone.
Mothers are gone. Mothers are gone. That's right. What I was saying. Okay.
Yeah.
Now my kids are going to force me to watch all the movies again. Not force. I love them all.
No,
of course.
the mothers.
But the mothers are gone, and the fathers marry somebody new. But the stepmother is the relationship is between stepmother and daughter.
Yes, Cinderella, Snow White.
Right. Right.
Bambi loses both parents.
Right.
You didn't know that I knew this.
That's right. So here we are. The Torah constructs a masculine version of it. Of course, the Torah's construct of this relationship is between son and father-in-law. Right, because Laban is not only his uncle, he's also father-in-law. This tradition of uncle being father-in-law was one that we listened and we followed to up until basically the 18th century as a Jewish people. We married within our families, and we found comfort in the idea that we knew the people that we were marrying. Yeah. And it's a wonderful tradition, except that genetically it's very problematic, and now we're paying the price. But bring back to the point. So here we have one construct. We have one portrayal of son and father-in-law that is, let's say, unhealthy. Mm-hmm. In the book of Exodus, we're gonna be presented with a second son father-in-law construct, almost the same well scene. Jacob goes to the well and he finds a wife. Rachel comes up with the sheep, and he goes back to her home and finds a family. Moses, when he runs away from Egypt, he also goes to the well, and he meets Zipporah at the well, and she brings him home to her house, and he finds a father-in-law in Yitro. Yitro is Kohen Midian. He's the priest of Midian. He's the high priest of Midian. He ends up raising Moses to a certain extent to be the leader of the Jewish people, even before God denotes that he will be the one to redeem the Jewish people from Egypt. Yitro takes him under his wing and says, I have what to teach you. Mm-hmm.
He's a mentor to him.
He's a mentor.
Yeah.
So even if we take this story and elevate it from Genesis and say, we're juxtaposing these two stories together, Lavan on one hand, Yitro on the other, how do we learn from these two different portrayals of father-in-law, of the in-law experience?
Well, look, the in-law experience, first of all, I want to say at the outset that I love my in-laws. They were very close. My father-in-law passed away a couple of years ago. We miss him. And my mother-in-law has been wonderful to me as a mother-in-law. So please hear that, okay? It's a fraught experience. First of all, anyone who would marry a Jewish boy, God help you. And then the question of, and I'm marrying your daughter, and what is my relationship to you? What do I owe you? I'm not your son, but I do have a connection to you. I'm the father of your grandchildren. It's a fraught connection. It's difficult. And it tests your power of forgiveness, understanding, patience, and love. I've certainly tested my father-in-law. I'm sure that you've done the same. It tests that relationship because you're not raising my grandchildren the way I want them raised, right? Well, but the idea is that I give you the room to be who you are. Lavon imposes upon Jacob constantly. Yitro understands that Moses has to be his own man. And it's really wonderful the way Yitro engages with him, Jethro engages with him. That wonderful scene after the Exodus when he goes to him. It's the beginning of the Parsha that's named for him. It's interesting, by the way, that there's a whole Torah portion named for the priest of Midian.
That's right.
Jethro. And he says to him, like, what are you doing?
And the revelation at Sinai occurs
yes,
in the Parsha named after his father-in-law.
Because the father-in-law says to him, listen, you are a great shepherd. You know how to lead sheep, but you don't know how to run a community. I'm the priest of Midian. Right. Let me show you how to run a community.
That's right.
And Jethro teaches him how to be a leader.
Right.
It's a remarkable image, that mentoring relationship. And so, Torah is asking us, look at the different models. Look what we can be to each other.
Mm-hmm. So there's another way to read the two names, okay? Lavon's name could be read as white, or it could be read as Laban, as for the son, right? Ben in Hebrew means son or child. And Lavon does everything not as if it's his son.
Yeah.
Right? Just like you categorize it, you classify it as he imposes himself on Jacob. Right. He takes Jacob into his family business, which also happens to be our family business as well, Jacob's family business. If someone asks me what should a good Jewish boy grow up to be, it's not doctor and lawyer, it's shepherd. Right? Shepherd, that's exactly right. Clearly in the Torah, it's shepherd. So Lavon brings Jacob into that business. We don't know about Lavon's sons, although we know that they're angry at the end of the story, that they think that Jacob has cheated them in some way. So we don't know their names, we don't know anything about them, but we know that they're disgruntled in the relationship that Lavon and Jacob have. So Lavon doesn't fulfill his name in terms of providing for Jacob like a son. Yitro can also be read as kind of yoter shelo. Yitro is to make Moses more of himself.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with Yitro. It has nothing to do with Yitro in of himself. Yeah. It has to do with making Moses the fullest version of Moses. Mm-hmm. And in that way, I don't think it matters whether it's a father or a father-in-law. I love both of mine. I should also make that declaration, because if my mother-in-law or father-in-law listen to this episode and they listen to all of them and they hear Rabbi Feinstein say that, but not me, it's going to be a problem. I also love both my mother-in-law and father-in-law. But I don't think it's about, I think it's very much like parenting in the sense that as much as we try and craft that person or design the relationship, it is in so many ways about allowing that person to be the best version of themselves,
right?
Affording that person an opportunity to grow in their own right.
So just for a moment, consider what we're talking about, right? The Jewish faith offers something which is so common that those of us who live in Judaism don't even notice it, that the spiritual drama of our people takes place inside of families. That family is the place where spiritual values are taught. Family is the drama in which you become the person you're meant. It's not obvious if you understand, so for example, world religions, right? In other religions, the family is not nearly as important as it is in Jewish faith. And what are we being taught here? The family, number one, is not an easy place to convey values, truth, personhood, because there's all sorts of conflicting impulses and motivations within families. But consider the place of the son-in-law or the daughter-in-law. I like to imagine that as the person who comes from the outside.
Right.
I joined my wife's family. They were more than gracious to me and are incredibly gracious to me. And yet I'm never as at home in my mother-in-law's house as I am in my own home, or the home I grew up in. And because there's just a slight sense of estrangement. And the question is, how do you make the son-in-law into a son? How do you make the daughter-in-law into a daughter? I remember I married Nina, and for 2 years I would sit in the den with my shoes on the floor, and I'd say, "Excuse me, Mr. Bieber, sir, but may I go to the refrigerator and get a glass of milk?" And at one point he looked at me and he said, "Listen, take your damn shoes off, put your feet on the coffee table, and if you want a glass of milk, go get your own goddamn glass of milk." Right? He was trying to say to me, "You're my son now. You belong here." We welcome people all the time into our family. And that's what their position is. When they join our family, they don't know our family jokes. They don't know our family stories. They don't know our family conflicts. They so want to belong. The question here is, how can I be Yitro and not Lavon? How can I welcome that outsider in and make them a daughter, make them a son? That's part of what this story is about.
Right. That's exactly right. And if Abraham and Sarah is a portrait of parenthood, and Isaac and Rebecca is a portrait of marriage, and I think of each of these as teaching different lessons of familyhood, because family doesn't come with an instruction manual.
Yeah, God, yes.
Okay, and perhaps it's the one thing in the world that desperately needs an instruction manual. I'm sure there's lots of people who have written books about, how to create a healthy family. I have many on my shelf, none that do a sufficient enough job, because every year they come out with new books in terms of guidance for family. We have many family therapists in our community who make a great living at doing just exactly this, which is mediating family conflict. But here we have an example of, in the book of Genesis, an example of, we're going to tell you a story about family because you're part of this story. At every stage of life. I don't care if you're a child, if you're a young adult, if you're an adult, if you're an older adult, you will find connection to these relationships in this story. You'll be able to relate to them.
Right.
And that's because family is the one constant in our lives.
Right.
We can change our jobs. We can change our organizational affiliation, our institutional affiliations. It's really difficult to change family. And the one example of changing family, of bringing in more family, of bridging family, is this one, is marriage and in-laws.
And what marriage brings to us, right?
And what marriage brings.
Right. And then we grow. I mean, I think the other, big lesson of this is that Jacob becomes Jacob in his conflict with Lavan. And in his dealing with his wives, that please don't try this at home. He's married to 4 women at the same time.
2 of them are sisters.
And 2 of them are sisters.
And later in Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus, we're told that you are not allowed to marry sisters,
be
ever.
A fool, yeah.
Right.
But the truth of the matter is he becomes who he's to become. He comes to understand himself through these relationships. We come to understand ourselves through these relationships. We learn patience, we learn understanding. We learn when to assert ourselves and when to step back, at least those of us who were smart. This is what family comes to do. Family is the crucible in which you form personality. And we raise children, and we try our best. And there are nights when we sit alone in the dark and say, did I do the right thing today? Right? You have teenagers in your home. I wish you many blessings.
Thank you.
Blessings of wisdom, patience, understanding, and more wisdom.
Yeah. No, it is a trying time, and it's a trying phase of life. But I'd also argue that Blair and I knew each other for a long, long time before we got married. We've known each other since we were 2 years old. So that would have been a totally normal story if we lived in 17th century Poland. But in 20th century America, that's not a normal story.
Yeah.
You and Nina knew each other for a long time.
Yeah, you beat us.
As well.
We only knew each other since we were 14.
Right. That's exactly right. So, in a way, though, when you're part of a story like this, with either one of our stories, you know your in-laws before you walk under the chuppah. And they know you. They know you really, really well. Right. They know all of your shortcomings, and they know all of the blessings you're about to bring and bestow upon their child. And when you're a groom, there's so much excitement and nervousness and all those things that go into the wedding.
Yeah.
when you're an in-law looking at that kid who's about to enter your family, I'd imagine that it's a very different experience.
It is a very interesting experience. Look, the basic rule, and you'll, God willing, one day see this, is you look for that person who looks at your kid the way you do. And when you look into the eyes of that person and you see that in his eyes or her eyes, they look at your kid with the same sense of preciousness and the same sense of attraction and hope that you have for your kid, then you say, okay, this is kosher. This is the one I want. And then the next piece, and you'll have this, God willing, one day soon, when it comes, is you have a relationship with your, and there's no word in English for this. In-laws, it's not, in-laws isn't quite it, machatanim.
Right.
The machatanim are the parents of my child's spouse.
Right. And that comes from the word chatan, meaning comes from the idea of marriage, that you're attached to these people too. These are attached. Machatanim means attached.
So you have machatanim. So we have 3 kids. Each of them are married. I have machatanim for each family. Right. And now, because we have a grandchild, that we are now fellow grandparents.
Right.
And they're so different. They're so interesting. Each of these families, by the way, is a very different family. And we have a very different relationship with each of them, but a very close relationship with each of them. And you learn this. You learn how to have that kind of relationship. It's a fascinating drama. That in other words, you think you're done.
Right.
You're going to send the kids off to college and that's it. No. You're just beginning. You're just beginning to realize, who are these new people in my life? Who are these people at my Shabbos table?
Right.
Who are these people that are caring for my grandchildren? It's a marvelous experience. And and to say this honestly, we have wonderful relationships with our machatanim because they're wonderful people.
Yeah.
And you discover the wonderful people that your kids discover. It's a wonderful thing.
Right. No, first your kids bring home friends, and we're going through this experience now where suddenly we don't know all the friends.
Right.
You know, for a long time through elementary school, we knew all the friends and we knew all the families. We knew where they're from. We knew all about them. And then, you know, at the beginning of junior high and high school, you start to meet new people. New people come over, and you know, who's this person?
Yeah, and your daughter will come home with a boy named Spike. He will have purple hair, and you will say
on the day that God forbid that happens,
and then
you're
you
going
will
to get a phone call in the middle of the night.
No.
I'm going to say,
you will discover that Spike's real name is Shlomo, and he's actually a lovely kid.
That's right.
You know?
That's right. Well,
underneath that goth exterior beats a warm, loving Jewish heart.
Right. A graduate of VBS Day School.
Yeah, amen. Amen.
Well, I hope that this began to scratch the surface of the beauty that is extended family and the challenge that is extended family, both, and all of that is a part of. It's a present in all of our lives, and that's what the Torah touches on. The Torah touches on it over and over again. Is that this is an eternal truth about navigating the world? Is that we also have to navigate the extended family, the extended Shabbos table.
You discover layers and qualities of love you didn't know you had, and that's what makes it sacred.
That's exactly right. Well, I hope that you have found this conversation to be enlightening and sacred, and we very much enjoy having these conversations. Please recommend Torah on the Go to your friends and extended family, even your in-laws. Tell your in-laws about Torah on the Go. Tell them to find the podcast and subscribe wherever they listen to podcasts. And we look forward to learning with you next time.
And Mom, I love you.
Bye-bye.